Welcome to the Getty-Dubay Italic Letter of the Day video series, where we use the Getty-Dubay Handwriting Success App to talk about best practices for each letter of the alphabet, one at a time. This video is for parents of school children, teachers, and adults who would like to work on their own handwriting. You can follow along using the app or any of the Getty-Dubay Italic handwriting workbooks, or simply use lined paper. Your handwriting can go places. Today we're practicing the letter J, and here we have a nice 9mm body height, nice big letter for us to practice, and that corresponds to, if you're writing at home on regular lined paper, that corresponds to what's typically a grade school lined paper. By comparison, college ruled paper is smaller than that. You could still use that if you like. Or legal tablet paper is even smaller. The younger the student, the larger size line you'd like to use. There's no harm in adults practicing large and then going small. The letter J is one of our family 1 letters, which includes I. Let's move over to the beginning of this line to review some of the vocabulary that we'll be using today. The base line is the line on which your letter is going to sit, except those that have descenders, in which case the letter is going to go down below the baseline to the descender height. Notice how in italic the descender height is 1/2 of the body height of a letter. The waistline establishes the top of the body height, and as I mentioned today, we're starting out with a 9mm body height, sometimes called an X height, because that is the size of the letter X. Going over to the letter J, we can see that this is a descender letter, and it also establishes both slope and spacing. J has a particular spacing issue that will come up in just a minute. For now, let's go over the 2 strokes of the letter J. And by the way, there are only 6 2-stroke letters in the italic, basic italic alphabet. I and J are 2 of them. And we're going to practice the time-honored tradition of copying and tracing. Downstroke and to the descender height and swing over, and the second stroke is just the dot on top. Again, downstroke, over as we reach the descender line. And the second stroke, a dot on top. Don't forget to breathe out on your vertical downstroke. It makes it nice and straight. And a dot on top. Here's our last tracing model before we go solo. This is like a rehearsal before the performance. Our dress rehearsal. And now here we go on our own. Let's try to match the slope of this letter and the spacing of the letters above. There we go. How did I do? Pretty good. Let's do that again. And there we go. I was a little short that time. The nice thing about the app that we're using today, the Getty-Dubay Handwriting Success App, is that you can digitally erase and write again. Oops, I was talking and did not breathe out on that downstroke. Here I go. Nice and straight. Okay, now notice that I am preferring a little bit more of a slope than what is presented in the model, and that's fine as long as I'm consistent in the slope from letter to letter. In other words, all of these downstrokes need to line up in parallel. And noticing that I'm experimenting with a new spacing. Similarly, you want to make sure that your spacing is consistent too. We don't want to have letters touch each other here. That would be confusing for the reader. Too much space makes it look like a different word. Fortunately, there aren't too many words in English with two J's. As a matter of fact, none that I know of. Now we're moving on to the cursive italic form of the letter J, and that belongs to the four letters that have an entrance serif, a sharp entrance serif. So here's our J here, and we've moved to a 5mm body height, which corresponds more closely to that narrow legal tab lined paper that we talked about before. A serif is just a means by which you can join one letter to the next. In this case, we're going to have an entrance serif, so letters joining into I would come into this serif, then a sharp angle down, downstroke, and across to the descender line. We can put either a jot or a dot on top of our letter. Again, entrance serif, sharp angle, down and across on the descender line. Let's do our last tracing model. Sharp entrance serif, up, down, and across. We'll put a jot on there. Time to go solo. Sharp entrance serif, up, down, and across. And we'll put a dot on that one. Now we want to avoid some of the situations of an extremely large serif with the letter on its own. Let's erase that. Or a loop going into that J. J is also a letter we don't want to join out of in cursive italic. Otherwise we would get a big loop like that. So we want to keep it nice and clean and simple. Sharp entrance serif up, vertical down, and across at the descender line. We believe it's important to introduce letters not in their alphabetical order, but based on their complexity, which is why we introduce family 1 letters I, J, and L first. And today we learned the lowercase basic italic J and the lowercase cursive italic J, which is exactly the same but with an entrance serif. We also feel strongly that the usefulness of repeating letters one after another diminishes greatly after about 6 or 8 letters. It's very important to get right in there and start combining the letter you're working on with other letters for letter combinations and whole words. So we're going to practice the join into J a little bit, and here are some examples. Here's the letter combination AJ, so we will trace the model first. A going into J with a jot, and trace again. And now we're going to copy right next to it. Here is the letter combination EJ. And we'll copy right below that. Copying directly below is better for left-handed writers because you can see the model as you're writing. And now let's put that J to work in a word. Can you think of a word that the second letter of which is a J? This is the one I thought of. Let's look at the history briefly of the letter J. The letter J and the letter I are tied together in their historical development. The ancient Egyptians had a hieroglyphic symbol for hand. So you can see the hand is grabbing something here. Here's the elbow and the forearm and the wrist. The Phoenicians took that up and simplified it. Instead of 2 lines, they just used 1, but we still have the thumb and the forefingers here, forearm, elbow, and arm. The Greeks simplified that even further by removing the thumb. Ouch. And they used a method of writing that changed direction. It was either right to left or left to right, depending on which line they're writing, odd or even. And similarly, the letter faced in the direction of the writing. Eventually, that was simplified to an ambidextrous straight vertical line, which the Romans took up for the capital I that we know today, the beautiful I from the Trajan column. And that was typically written with a brush, and later incised in stone if they decided to do that. That letter I evolved over time, and eventually, in the 16th century, the long I was created, which is our letter J. That is why the letter J has a jot or a dot on it as the I does. And notice that in italic we have the full descender length on the lowercase j. And down here, the modern versions of the basic italic J that we practiced and the cursive italic J. And notice the cursive italic does not have a loop, as in looped cursive. Very simple and clean. We hope you've enjoyed this video on the italic J.